Hey everybody, welcome to the first episode of what I am calling voice chat, basically one-on-one long-form interviews. The interviews that I do as a part of the regular feature videos are great, but not only do I have to cut them down a lot, my questions are often more specific to one or two topics. So this format will allow me to expand on what are often highly nuanced subjects. And since I'll be conducting them across the internet, I'm not limited to the places that Cloth Map has physically gone to. I can talk to anybody. These videos will go up for free on YouTube, and if you're a Patreon subscriber, you'll get the option to listen to them as podcasts. If you're not a patron, you can sign up at patreon.com/clothmap and get access to all of our behind-the-scenes stuff, store discounts, the Discord chat room, etc. So another cool thing I can do with this format is follow up with people that we've talked to in the past. Case in point, Gus Lanzetta. You may remember Gus as the guy who showed us those weird old Brazilian game consoles in his apartment, along with some truly wild Sega Genesis games. Gus is now the executive producer of a podcast network in Brazil, the flagship of which is this really cool show called Export Report that should be right up your alley if you are a Cloth Map viewer. We touch on all kinds of strangeness that happens in Brazil, like fully sanctioned ROM hacks, Nintendo factories, publishers publishing other publishers, all the socio-political weirdness that exists in Brazil and how it results in some truly unique stuff as it pertains to games. We also get into the burgeoning developer scene there, Joey's pizza inventions, Japanese toilets, of course. Many things are discussed with Gus. There will, of course, be links in the show notes wherever you are imbibing this thing, whether on YouTube or Patreon. So without further ado, please enjoy this voice chat with Gus Lanzetta.
I'm here. Good. I feel like I feel a great sense of deja vu. Talking to you in front of cameras. This is happening all over again. It's like this intro is the second time we're doing it. It's just, I feel at home. That's what I'm saying.
That's great. Yes. It's been, when was I there?
Late 2017. So that was, it's been a year and a half. Oh, it will be 2 years this year.
That's crazy.
It is. You should come back.
I'd love to come back.
You got that visa. You might as well use it. You're not going to need it anymore from June on.
Is that right?
Yeah. No, for Canadians, Americans, Japanese, and I think that's it. You're not going to need a visa anymore to come to Brazil. Oh,
that's nice. Because honestly, the visa was kind of a pain to apply for. Oh yeah.
Oh.
It's at least for I'd put it up there. It's right behind Russia as I think one of the hardest visas to.
And you see,
get.
Brazilian citizens do not need a visa to go to Russia. So I think that's kind of on you guys.
Yeah, I think so. And also, I think it's Brazil where they match whatever the visa fee for the other country is. So whatever the U.S. is charging Brazilians to get a visa, Brazil charges Americans.
Yes, and like this new decision that was made just to kind of suck up to the American government will cost us I think $15 million.
Oh, okay.
So it's a horrible decision all around, but makes life more comfortable for guys like you. So at least we get that. Like it's easier for you guys to come down here.
Yeah, and I would honestly recommend people go to Brazil. It's super cool.
And it has never been cheaper for you guys because the real is worth nothing right now. So things have never been better for tourists from America.
One thing I noticed while I was there is that every Brazilian we talked to seems to have a ton of things going on. Like they're Renaissance men and women in Brazil.
Maybe, especially because you came first to São Paulo, and it's kind of a very busy city, and it's our hobby to keep busy. So maybe that's why the impression was that, and also because you talked to a lot of people from that cover video games or work with video games, and a lot of times that's not enough to pay the bills. So doing a lot of things helps you pay the bills.
So what things are you doing these days?
So right now, I'm actually very focused on one thing for once in my life.
Wow.
And I have a podcast production company that I started last year, HepDev. And we're doing, we did the first Spotify original show here, and we're producing more shows for them. And we also have, I think, like 12 or 14 shows on right now that we produce and distribute. So we've been busy doing that. Like, that's what I've been doing.
12 to 14 shows?
Yes, and developing more.
Oh my gosh.
I finally became an executive producer.
Oh,
And
man.
I say things like, well, I think the format needs changing. It's so weird. But yeah, like, because last time you were here, I was doing, I was writing for a TV show in Rio, and I was starting out SHVB, which is my Game Preservation Society with Fabio and Pedro, and that's still going. Like, a lot of bureaucracy had to be done with that, but that's almost the bureaucracy part is almost done with, and we've been helping out Frank with the Video Game History Foundation and talking to other orgs. But now I'm really, really focused on the doing of the podcasts.
Nice. So actually, it's a great segue to roll into the one you launched. When did you launch Export Report?
So Export Report, we launched in January this year. We started recording episodes late last year, and then we released, I think, 4 or 5 episodes. And now we're just trying to like find time to record more.
So what's the pitch on that?
Okay, so Export Report is me, Bruno Diaz, and Pedro Falcão, who are 2 game devs here in Brazil, talking about Brazilian game culture to foreigners, because we think there's a lot of content being produced here about Brazil, but it's all in Portuguese, so it's kind of not it doesn't help a lot the people that we know that work outside. And Bruno has been writing for also like for American outlets for a while. He wrote for Giant Bomb, he wrote for Waypoint. So that's like, he was doing that outreach already, and we kind of just set one day. I was like, it would be cool to do this as a podcast and like tackle cool stuff. So we have like the first episode we interviewed all the Celeste guys from Brazil, because like
that was super interesting. I just wanted to highlight one thing. I knew this was a special podcast when I heard them discuss doing the art for a level that had snow in it. And none of those Brazilians had ever seen snow. And so they're like, I think Matt, is that the director of Celeste? He had to
Matt
mention
is Canadian.
Yeah, he's Canadian, and he had to tell his artists, no, that the roofs on the buildings need to be angled so that snow can fall off of them. And like, how would you know that unless you had like been around snow? Like that kind of stuff is my jam. Like, I love hearing those kinds of things.
Exactly. It's like, it's something that I would have never thought about. It's like, oh yeah, that's why their roofs are that way. Yeah, of course. Yeah. If we just go by like, well, I'm just going to draw my house when I was a kid. It's like, it's not going to look like a house that can handle some snow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we did interviews with them, with other devs that kind of illustrate different ways to work. Like, they were kind of our example of like, what is it like to be an indie dev in Brazil? And that's good we recorded that interview, because now they've moved to Canada. So
have they really?
Yes, they are not in Brazil anymore. So we celebrated their going away party by watching all the Fast and Furious in my house. So I thought that was a good going away party, because they had never watched it, and so I was like, you have to watch it. And Amora was really into it, and it's good because it's a movie franchise that has visited Brazil. You know, it kind of creates this bridge between North and South America.
Brazil.
Brazil, this is Brazil. Yeah. And so they really illustrate something really cool about this. Being an indie dev here wasn't an option before these guys. Like, they're the first big breakout indie devs here, and they deserve all the success they got with Celeste. And I'm so happy that they were so celebrated. And it was great because we had that interview in the can right before the Video Game Awards. And then when they won, we were like, oh, we're going to release that interview first. So that was really good. And then we talked to Rodrigo Chips. He works at Rockhead Studios here. And he's a guy who's been working at big studios. Well, you know, like big for Brazil studios since like 2005. So his interview covers a lot of what is like to be part of the studio system here. And so we're always trying to find guests that kind of give you a point of view of different parts of the industry in Brazil.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great idea for a podcast because I think you're right. The language barrier kind of, at least from an American perspective, Brazil is still it's a gigantic country with hundreds of millions of people, but it still feels really far away and kind of cut off from like our perception. And so doing a podcast about, this niche thing that people can really gravitate toward in English that sort of exposes this whole, I mean, it's one of the things that fascinated me the most about Brazil was that it was like this untapped, it was like I discovered another planet where like this video game stuff was going on that I had no idea about and was super fascinating.
Well, yeah, completely. And even to talk to our neighbors, like to talk to Argentinians and Chileans and all those countries that also have great gaming scenes. A lot of I don't speak Spanish that much, and a lot of them don't speak Portuguese, but most people, especially people that work with games and technology, they speak English. So it ends up being a way for us to talk to each other as well. I think it's going to be great for Americans to listen to it, but it's going to be great for people. I know people from Holland that've been listening. So English kind of became our international language. It's this year's Esperanto. So it helps build that bridge.
Yeah, for sure. So can you give a brief overview of what conspired to create this sort of alternate reality in terms of video games in Brazil?
Right. So it's a lot of factors. So in the 80s, when there's a lot of consoles coming out, you had very weird laws about what you could import, and especially as far as electronics and industrial goods. So a lot of companies here could not just import consoles and sell them, but they could create clones here and sell them, much like they did in China and Korea at the same time.
And those are legal clones, right? Well, they are.
If no one
question mark.
It's kind of like what happens in China of if you don't have a copyright here, how can I enforce it? If you don't register your copyright with my country, how can my country enforce your copyright? So it's kind of a gray area of they're doing we're manufacturing those chips and no one came here to claim that copyright. So and eventually, and since it was very hard for companies outside of Brazil to come in, for a long time it was no man's land. But you see, as soon as Sega comes in, you have the official Master System and you have Tectoy representing them. And then eventually in 1990, Gradiente, which used to manufacture Nintendo clones, becomes one of the companies representing Nintendo here. And so they start manufacturing the official Brazilian NES. So
right. So why does a company have to represent another country? Nintendo can't just ship NESs here to Brazil, right?
Right. Well, they could now, but still, no one would do that in any country because you still have to take care of logistics. You still have to have a relationship with retail and all of that. So you're always going to have someone representing a company somewhere. The difference here is that because of import tariffs and things like that, it was it made more sense economically to manufacture and assemble things here. So Tectoy would import all the chips they needed for a Master System or a Mega Drive, and then assemble it here. Assemble the board and the video game itself, the console, here. So that would make it cheaper because importing just the pieces would be, you would pay less import taxes than just importing the whole thing and selling it. And this is something that still goes on. We are the first country outside of China to manufacture the Xbox 360 and the Xbox One, for example, because they used to import. Microsoft used to import the Xbox 360 and sell it here, but then eventually, I think in 2011 or 2012, they were like, well, we're going to just assemble it in Brazil, and that dropped the price drastically for them, and that helped the 360 penetrate the market a lot
because of the import tariffs. Were still.
Yeah. Because it was you're still importing something to build in Brazil, so you're generating jobs, you have manufacturing going on here, you're paying taxes other ways, so it ends up being cheaper and it ends up being a good thing for the country at the end of the day. I know a lot of gamers don't like it, they go I just wish I could just import my games really cheap, but it ended up helping us have a more solid video game market because companies like Nintendo, which never manufactured anything here once their deal with Gradiente fell through during the GameCube. They had a Panamanian company called Latamel represent them here, and all they did was imports, and so everything was very expensive. And as soon as things weren't going well sales-wise, they just left. So because they didn't invest as much in the country, they didn't have a solid base, it was easy for them to just move. And it's harder for companies like Sony and Microsoft, which are well established here, to do the same. They kind of have to pay attention to us.
It seems like in the 80s and 90s, it was this Wild West where you had Sega, which was like pretty legit, but then you also had, I guess, any number of fly-by-night hardware companies just kind of creating stuff where an NES game can run on it, but it is not an NES.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like the Dynavision is probably the most notorious one of those companies, because like through the early 2000s, they were making the Dynavision, which was an NES clone.
Wow.
And we had the Polystation, which I believe is Chinese in origin. It looks like a PS1, but it's actually just an NES. I shipped one of those to the Portland Retro Gaming Expo late last year, because Frank Cifaldi was doing an expo on like how the NES never died. It just went through multiple forms, and so he wanted to have some Brazilian NES clones as well. So we shipped him some consoles. But yeah, in the 90s, like even though you had the presence of Sega and Nintendo here, most of the market was pirated games, like pirate cartridges, because it was really expensive to buy games. So we would buy cheap bootleg cartridges on the street for like 5 reais. And it was a fascinating world of like Sonic 4 on the SNES.
And there were the pirated games, which are just basic, copies of real games.
Yeah.
But then you had things like ROM hacks, where they would just like put Sonic in a Mario game or vice versa. But then did you also have ground up, homebrew games, for lack of a better word?
I don't remember any homebrew games back then. I don't think it was as easy to just to develop games for those systems back then. But ROM hacks were very popular. There was Sonic 4 is a famous one. It's made in Chile. It's actually the Speedy Gonzales SNES game, but instead of Speedy Gonzales, it's Sonic, and instead of like saving other rats, you're saving Marios. So there's a you got to interpret it many ways. And the very famous ones were like International Superstar Soccer mods. That was like Ronaldinho Soccer, things like that would have the local Brazilian teams and all the real player names. And and that is still very popular today. We have Bomba Patch, which is the mods for the PS2 version of Pro Evolution Soccer, which you can download or buy pirated and play with all the local teams, all the real players that they haven't licensed, and like with a new soundtrack usually. So that was really popular. And GTA mods became very popular during the PS2 era, to just like buy GTA San Andreas, but you play as like the president and you have real cars and weird Brazilian funk music as the soundtrack. So the whole ROM hack modding scene on consoles was huge here, and kind of still is very culturally significant, because you had access to it, because everyone had modded consoles and everyone had the ability to play pirated games.
But I mean, that Sonic 4 Speedy Gonzales story is like, as soon as you say that, you want to see it. You want to, like, as a video game fan, I want to see what that looks like. I want to play that. That's so weird that someone created that and that exists. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to try to preserve this subculture of games?
Oh yeah. I think it's very important.
Importance of it. Yeah,
it's really important, and I think it's kind of our job here to talk to local collectors and the people that are kind of like physically preserving this stuff, to kind of pay attention to this, because I still think to this day, collectors in Brazil only care about American and Japanese games, because that's what we saw as legit, as that stuff was the most expensive when we were growing up. So we look at that and go like, oh, that's the real stuff. That's what I want to collect. And these bootleg cartridges, they're worthless. right? But we see now that it's like, well, no, there's something unique here. There's an expression of our culture, and there's an experience that only we had, and we need to preserve it so other people can see it. So in the case of Sonic 4, like, thankfully there's a dump of that. You can play it on an emulator. You can find it easily. But right now, we have a Super Campeonato Brasileiro 2, which is one of those soccer mods that is still undumped. And we got that cartridge, and I think it was made by the same team that did Sonic 4. So that's the weird thing. It was like made in Chile, but clearly for the Brazilian market. Because since you couldn't distribute the ROM hacks online, not a lot of people had emulators. It was a way to make money. You could make the ROM hack, manufacture some cartridges, and sell them and make some money that way. So they were focused on like, oh, this is going to sell well in Brazil. Let's do this. So, and that's something where, and now like, the Video Game History Foundation is helping us dump that and have that digitally archived so we don't miss it. Because then, like any game you played as a child in the US, if you talk about it, I can probably find video of it. I can find a ROM of it, but that's not true for everything we played as kids here. So that's the importance, is that some of these things are being lost, and not just in Brazil. There's similar cases in Taiwan, in Korea, in China. So to look at piracy and at ROM hacks without the eyes of kind of the industry that looks at it as like, oh, this is illegal, this is a problem, and just look at it, hey, it happened, it's part of our culture. I don't care if it's violating IP or not. It's like, this needs to be preserved because we played it. That happened. We need to preserve our history.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like an integral part of the culture for sure. Like, it was not, video games are not some fringe thing in Brazil. They are just as big as they are in the US, it seems.
Yeah, and like the famous Brazil only games, like the Monica games, the Woodpecker games, all that stuff was made officially, but like ROM hacks. I talked to a guy that worked on the development of those games at Tectoy, and he was talking, they developed them so late in the lifespan of the Genesis that Sega didn't have dev kits to send them. They're like, you can make the games, but you guys figure it out. So they had their own engineers kind of reverse engineer the games and just figure out like, oh, this is how we can substitute sprites. This is how we can translate games. So they translated the whole Final Fantasy, the first and second Final Fantasy games, Final Fantasy Star games for the Master System, just by doing that, of just like finding where the text was and realizing the text was all sprites, and then just rebuilding all those sprites once the game was translated. Because it was like, yeah, Sega was like, dude, it's 1995. We care about the Saturn. Well, should they or should they not? Anyways, but they didn't have they didn't have dev kits to supply. They didn't have documentation. They didn't care about helping out these Brazilian guys make Genesis games, even though later it would like kind of prove to be more profitable than the Saturn, especially here. But so kind of this garage game development is emblematic of making games in South America, even inside companies like that, because the official games we got still had to be done like ROM hacks.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get to I guess the state and history of development in Brazil, but I did want to talk a little bit about Monica and Woodpecker. Could you explain kind of what the story is with those?
Okay, so Monica is a local comic book character. She's a child that wears a red dress, and she has like this blue stuffed bunny, and she beats boys that make fun of her with the bunny. Mm-hmm. And she has kind of it's kind of analogous to Peanuts, maybe, if Peanuts was a comic book, and it's been running since God knows when, like the 60s, I guess.
Still going.
It's still going, and now they have the teen version, which is kind of manga influenced, and so it's really like an essential part of our culture. And so when Tectoy was like kind of looking to do licensed games, that was the first license they thought about. So Monica, that really worked out. I think they made 1 or 2 games with Monica. Woodpecker is not ours. It's American. It's a Universal property, but it's somehow really popular here. Even the recent movie, I think we were the best market for it, the CGI Woody Woodpecker movie. So that was, I think, the last one of those games they made for the Genesis. But they also did for the Master System, they did at least one Chapulín Colorado game, which is based on a Mexican TV show, a comedy show aimed at children, that is really popular here to this day. Is like it started airing in the 70s and then started airing here in the 80s, but it's still going. Sometimes it goes off the air for a bit and then people cry about it and it comes back. And so since it was really popular here, they also did games based on that. And they also did ports like Duke Nukem 3D for the Genesis, because it was like
what?
Duke Nukem 3D for the Genesis is a Brazilian exclusive. Because it was like, hey, this game's really popular, but people overwhelmingly have Genesis. They don't have PlayStations or Sega Saturns in the case of Tectoy, what really mattered. So they're like, well, we're just going to port it. We're going to make a version of this for the Genesis. It's really expensive now. It's like, it's easy. It's like $150 to get one of those cartridges, because it's our thing, man. Yeah, we have I think some version, the Street Fighter 2 for the Master System is also something Tectoy did here. It's because it's like that. You gotta have the version for the console that people have. So it didn't matter that everybody's playing SNES and Genesis outside, but in Brazil it's Master System, baby.
What's up with Wonder Boy?
What's up? So that's Monica. The first, the Monica game for the Master System is a mod of Wonder Boy 3. I'm gonna get massacred here because I don't know which Wonder Boy it is, and this is the internet. But it's a mod of one of the Wonder Boys, and actually it's the Wonder Boy that got remade a couple years ago, because on Steam, if you buy that game, you can download the mod that has super high-res Monica textures, so you can play like kind of an HD remake of that. And I think someone even showed that to Mauricio de Souza, which who's Monica's creator, and he was like, "That's cool."
That's awesome. All right, so if someone wants to make a game in Brazil right now, a kid who wants to make this a career, or even to write about video games, how possible is that, and what kind of challenges do they face? Well,
thinking about writing about video games first, because that's my experience. I think it seems to be harder these days. Because when I started out writing for magazines, and there were a bunch of them, and now there aren't. And even the kind of like, I feel like in the US as well, even the online market has shrinked, a bit. I don't know. Like, I feel like even GameSpot and IGN back in like the early aughts had way bigger staffs and bigger, editorial staffs, especially. So the same thing is kind of happening here. People don't know how to make money with editorial content on the internet, and even video game companies don't want that anymore, because now they can have their own Facebook pages and their own YouTube channels and just reach the fans directly. So I think that has contracted a bit. Of course, you can always be a YouTuber and kind of, however that works. I don't know. You're a YouTuber.
Am I?
I'm sorry. Well, you're not, because like you get money out of Patreon, right? So if you just want to start a channel and you don't have an audience and you just want to kind of make your money out of YouTube ads, it's probably really hard as well. Yeah. There's not a lot of famous people doing that. So I think that is kind of the same everywhere. Development is way better now for people here, because the way I see it, there's way more universities that have game development courses. Access to the development tools is much easier. You can have student licenses for Unity and Unreal and all the kinds of engines you want to do. People are playing way more games. Like, you can make a mobile game and everyone has a mobile phone that will run your game, and you can have very kind of like not very resource intensive games on the PC and kind of just distribute them through itch and things like that. So I think there has never been a better time to make video games, and in Brazil especially. And now for the last few years, we've had the government has helped out giving funding to game development projects locally, just as it does with movies and TV. Just it became part of our recognized as the part of the audiovisual production of Brazil and part of our culture.
Wow,
So
that's great.
You can get subsidies and stuff like that. Well, maybe you can't anymore because there's some news that came out today, and the new president's kind of weird. But but if all goes well, it should keep going. Like I even had conversations with the agency that takes care of all that stuff, because they also take care of preserving movies here. So, and they were talking to us about how do we preserve games? Can we help out and maybe help us with a bit of funding to do some of those projects of preserving video game production in Brazil. So things are improving, I believe. And there's also an aspect of game development being, like, especially in AAA games, being so spread out over many studios. So we have studios here that have worked on AAA games, like Horizon Zero Dawn has a bunch of assets that were built by a Brazilian studio. Celeste, that we mentioned before, all the art was done here, and they collaborated on the story with Matt, who was in Canada. I think that the internet is helping out a lot, so that even if you can't make a whole game by yourself in Brazil, you can be part of the international development scene. There's art in Sonic Mania that was done by Brazilian devs. There's art in that new Zelda from the Crypt of the Necrodancer guys. There's Brazilian devs working on that. So really, indie dev and the internet have been a huge help for Brazilians, because it's really hard to just start out making AAA games and very complex games. But the way things are, that there's a market for small games and that you can develop games remotely, has helped a lot.
Yeah, because I always found it strange that, like, for a long time, we had always heard that Brazil was this, game-loving culture. And there are, again, hundreds of millions of people there, but yet we didn't ever hear about a Brazilian game. And still to this day, I guess there are some outliers, but it sounds like things are looking up. So that's great to hear.
And there was always like some outsourcing. Like there's some weird Ubisoft DS games that you wouldn't say, but were developed here. And there's like the Deer Hunter games. Some of those were developed here. So yeah, there was nothing that expressed Brazilian culture. That it was always like work for hire, and now that's not the case. We have Celeste, Amora and Pedro contributed a lot to the themes of that game, and we had Dandara, which was really big, and it was 100% done in Brazil, and it carries a lot of Brazilian cultures and references in it. So I think, we needed the market to shift to like digital and to a lower bar of entry. So now we can be part of it.
One other thing that I think kind of surprised me was or at least I didn't consider when you are in Brazil making a game, is that and I learned this talking to some indie devs in Rio as part of Ring, I think it's called, a collection of indie devs there. They, at some point, have to decide, is my game going to be to have a Brazilian influence, or is that going to pigeonhole us too much? Do we need to make something with more broad appeal? I mean, how do you answer that, do you think?
I don't know, like the devs I talk to, and by looking at the games that come out, the smartest decision everybody's making right now is that our games are not for Brazilians. They are by Brazilians, but they are for the whole world. There's a bunch of reasons to do that. One is to not be pigeonholed, and also it's a smarter move if you want to move copies. Not as many people buy games here. We don't have as much money. So even like I remember talking, I think, to the Chroma Squad developers that like Brazil was their, like, it was not maybe their number 3 market, and I think the Celeste, when it started out, like right when it came out, like the first couple months, I think Brazil was the 5th market. There's a lot of countries out there that have way more disposable income to buy games and have way more that have bigger install bases with consoles. So that's also something. If you want to be a successful game developer, you should make games for people that are going to buy them, and not just kind of, I want to be a Brazilian game developer and my country needs to support me. It's unfortunately still not going to happen, and a lot of gamers still just want to buy the Call of Duties and the super mainstream kind of stuff. So to aim for the audiences that are already purchasing a lot of indie games is very smart by Brazilian devs.
You talked a little bit about how like Microsoft still has a similar arrangement as console makers did in the past. Are there still echoes of that arrangement today in the way that consumers consume games or get access to games? I mean, you mentioned them being kind of expensive. What kind of roadblocks are there or weirdness around that?
Well, I think the echoes, like, well, in the case of Microsoft, they still have to manufacture it here, but they own the whole shebang. They only deal with like local distributors and stuff like that, but like it's their own. They're doing the manufacturing, the importing, all that stuff. I think the echoes, maybe the fact that we have like most games and most of the huge like Activision games and that stuff comes here through distributors who have, at least in the past when I was a reporter reporting on things like this, been very shady in their business practices. So a lot of the times the consumer doesn't even know, like they won't pay attention to who's the importer of that thing. But if you are part of the market here, a part of the industry, you'll know, like, oh, maybe some of these things aren't getting here through the most legal of means, or through companies that actually care about what they're doing. They just know that, oh, this thing moves copies. Let's just sell this, and just weird things like there isn't a big enough market for there to be that many publishers. So all Capcom games here are published by Warner, and and for a while there, all EA games were also Warner published. And I don't think that's still the case, but maybe it is. I don't know. There's like one Blu-ray pressing factory owned by Sony, so Sony does all of everyone's games. And there's some just kind of
like including Xbox games.
Yes, all Xbox games come from Sony DADC in Manaus.
This is why I love Brazil. It's so
and
so good.
and for a while there, I don't know if it's still happening, but Sony Music was struggling, and so they started publishing games, but they published like Xbox games. They just became like a publisher. They were like, this THQ game, we're going to distribute this. So because they're a completely separate business from like Sony PlayStation. Wow. And so you could buy Sony distributed Xbox games. So it's mostly like the stuff that lingers on is just like fun trivia, I guess. The market is much more healthy nowadays and much more legit.
Okay. And I mean, with the sort of ever-increasing connectivity and globalization, I mean, does it feel there like the separation is not as great as it used to be from the rest of the world? Like, I mean, you're playing online with, everybody else now, and
oh yeah,
or
totally.
Is that the case?
And you're getting games day one because you can just buy them directly digitally. And Steam has been a huge help because publishers can practice way better prices because they don't have to release anything physically here. So prices on Steam are still bad, and they depend on the dollar valuation of things, but it's still way better than having to buy boxed games at retail because that was super expensive. And having digital retail in all of the consoles helps a lot. And yeah, it's kind of we play with everybody. Most like state capitals have decent internet. Like there's a lot of challenges still to be overcome, but yeah, things are way better now. And we still have a Master System, like in stores. You can buy a brand new Master System today. So take that, man. People like to say Japan is like tradition and modernity. My friend, Brazil is tradition and modernity. You can walk into a store, buy a PS4 game and a Master System. Who can do that?
Only Brazil.
Only Brazil. This this place never ceases to amaze me, and I've been here my whole life.
Yeah. I miss Brazilian food.
I knew it, man. I knew it.
Coxinas. I think Joey, Cloth Map, director of photography, Joey Famelli, actually made Koshina's.
He made Kushina's. I admire that. He's
back.
he likes to cook just like I do, and he invented something that I thought was fascinating because he really liked farofa, stir fried manioca flour, and so he told me he was buying it on Amazon. So last time I was in the States, when I saw you guys at E3, I brought him a bunch of farofa from Brazil. I was like, no, this is the good stuff, and he's like all into making pizzas at home now. Like he has a pizza oven, I guess. And he was like, hey, dude, I just put some farofa on top of the pizza and just like let it bake and it got real crispy. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. We needed an outsider to look at the possibilities of farofa to its full extent. So I think Joey right now is someone to watch for the Brazilian-Italian fusion cuisine. I think this trip has immensely helped him as a cook. And as really a Renaissance man, really a man who makes movies and documentaries and pizza with farofa, which is something I haven't tried yet, but sounds delicious.
I'm kind of surprised it's not more of a thing because there are a lot of pizza places in Sao Paulo.
And we put all kinds of things on pizza that I personally would not recommend to be on pizza. But that's kind of a thing that we haven't really started doing. And I think it's kind of like that since farofa is always there, you kind of just don't look at it with the eyes of a newcomer like Joey did. And that's what we need. We need innovation. We need indie pizza developers like Joey looking at things from a different angle. And that's what we bring as Brazilians to the game industry. And he brought it to farofa.
Well, maybe he can get some government grants and really put something together.
Yeah, like I think if Joey comes down here and start doing farofa pizza, or maybe he can talk to the Brazilian embassy in the U.S. and kind of go like, I want to make farofa popular here. I want to make you guys big exporters of manioca flour. Maybe that's how he retires. He becomes the farofa king of California, and that's how he goes. But yeah, Koshina is probably like. I spent a while in Japan last year, and I was like, that was, I think, the thing I started missing the most. Even though those guys can fry chicken very well.
Yeah, how was Japan? What were you doing there?
It was so great I
vacation?
came back. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I went in December of 2017, and I stayed there for like 21 days. And
oh my gosh.
I fell in love with the country so hard that I bought a Japanese toilet and brought it home.
A little piece of Japan.
You can't go back. Like 21 days using one of those, like your butt is not gonna fly back to the past. Like I couldn't. Like now, and I have it. Like every day is a fun day, and I feel the cleanest I've ever been. And I loved it, and I got to meet a whole bunch of gaming people, the 8-4 guys, everybody that goes to like the meetups they do there every week, and drink a lot of sake underneath a bridge after the bars close down. And I got to meet Joseph Redon, who is the founder of the Game Preservation Society. And I got to tour their archives and just talk to him. Like, he does like fantastic, super high level archival job for video games. Like he's one of the guys who helped invent the CryoFlux. So that was really, 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 really great. So I loved it. And then Eric, who you met in Rio, was like, well, I want to go to Japan. I have vacation time coming in October. Do you want to go? And by then, I still had my TV job. So I was like, sure, I don't care. I have money. But then that job was no more, Drew.
Oh, no.
But then I already had the ticket, so I had to go. So I went with Eric, and we stayed at this apartment owned by this couple who are chefs, and they do cooking lessons. And I actually found them through the Discord, the Cloth Map Discord. There's a travel stuff channel there.
Yeah.
And I was like looking for places to stay in Tokyo. And someone was like, oh, I took cooking classes with these chefs and they have an apartment. And I was like, oh, great, I'll email them. And so it was Ayuku, and she was lovely, and she was so helpful, and I learned so much. And she took me to like the last day of the Tsukiji market being open, and I got to enter the part that gaijin should not enter.
Oh, wow.
And I got to film some stuff there. It was so cool. So I did a lot of that. I visited the Tokyo Sushi Academy. So it was really my cooking trip was the second time, but still got to meet a lot of cool developer guys. So I visited Hawkins' studio. He does like a lot of VR stuff and AR stuff.
Okay.
But I fell in love with Japan, Drew. I got to go back.
Yeah.
I can't be here all the time. I got to go back. But I have my toilet to remind me of Japan every day.
You can just look at that.
But yeah, I'm taking Japanese lessons now. Everything has changed.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I mean, I've been to Japan a couple times, and even it's one of the few places where on my flight back, I start to miss it immediately.
Yeah, it is so great. I was talking to a friend of mine that covered TGS in 2010, and he goes like, I still miss it. It has been almost 10 years, and he goes like, I still think about it.
Yeah.
It's great. But Brazil is also cool.
Brazil is very cool.
Kind of warm right now.
Maybe. Yeah, we had a pretty good time about the time we went. It was
a good time to come. Yeah, because it was right before summer. It was like October, I think.
Right. Yes, you are below the equator.
We are, and it doesn't look like it'll change that soon. It's like we're staying around below the equator. I don't know. The planet's crazy. Who knows?
All right, Gus. Where can people find you and the things you do if they want to know more?
All right. Export Report is the podcast I do in English, and you can find that wherever pods are cast. My producer is laughing at me right now. She kept a straight face the whole time, but this is yes, I got you. Gus Lanzetta on Twitter and Instagram. I mostly post in Portuguese, but Instagram has like foods of picture, and that's the universal language of Instagram.
It certainly is. And how about the Preservation Society in Brazil? Is there an online presence for that at all?
Yeah, we have a website right now, which is just signing up for a mailing list. It's shvb.com.br. And we're going to have things soon. Because as soon as the whole bureaucracy is settled, we can start operating as a nonprofit and get donations to start making videos. We have a documentary in the works about Brazil's rental shops. We have an episode of the Export Report about that, about how these places created gamer culture, is because people didn't have money to buy consoles and games, so they would pay hourly to play games at the rental shops. And that's where the first video game magazines came from, and that's really where gamer culture formed here.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks again for talking with us, and
no problem.
Wish you all the best.
Yeah, I mean, wish you all the best as well. I may be going to San Francisco at some point, because I was going last year, but my passport didn't, it was expired. I had to get a new one. But if I'm in town, you're in town, we'll grab some coxinhas or whatever you got there.
Nice. We'll figure it out. Thanks, guys.
Cool. Bye-bye.